Okay, so today we're going to be talking about percent proportion. Now, the definition of a percent proportion is one ratio or fraction that compares part of a quantity to a whole quantity, and another ratio that is the equivalent percent written as a fraction with the denominator 100. Now, this is all maybe a little confusing, and so it's easier to see when it's actually illustrated out. So, for example, we're going to have 1/2, which is in fact a ratio or fraction. And then we have that 1 is the part. All right. And we have that 2 is the whole. Okay. So, for example, you've eaten one piece of the 2 pieces of pie. So you've eaten 1/2. You've eaten one part out of the whole. So that takes care of the part of a quantity. And then the 2 takes care of a whole quantity. All right, but now we still have another ratio to make. The next ratio we're going to make is the equivalent percent written as a fraction. So we have 50 over 100 because 1/2 is 50%. So this is our percent. And these two things are proportional. 1/2 is proportional to 50 over 100. 50 is 1/2 of 100. So that takes care of the equivalent percent written as a fraction. Now remember, percents are always out of 100. That's why the denominator is 100, because the percent is 50% and we put it over 100. Now remember also what proportional means. Proportional is when you have two ratios that have a constant rate or ratio between them. So 1/2 is the constant ratio between these two, and they are in fact proportional. So let's go on to an example. Now, the example says, what percent of $15 is $9? So right here, we have 9 and 15. Now, 9 is our part, and 15 is our whole. All right, so we're gonna create our percent proportion in order to find that percent, because it's asking what percent. So to go back to the other page here, we have the part, we have the whole. We know that the denominator of the second ratio is going to be 100, but we don't know what percent is there. So we can write our other ratio. We know our denominator is going to be 100 because percents are always out of 100, but we don't know what this numerator is going to be. So we put in a variable for it. Let's say the variable is m. Now, back when you all were doing proportions and ratios, in order to determine if these two ratios right here, to determine if these two ratios were equivalent, all you did was you cross multiplied. So that's all we're going to do here. We're going to cross multiply. We're going to go 9 times 100, and then we're going to make that equal to, because we want to, in fact, keep this equal sign. We want to find out what m has to be in order for these two ratios to be proportional. So then we have 15 times m. So it's 15m. So we can simplify this part. 9 times 100 is 900, and that equals 15 times m. Now this looks very familiar. I believe you all did this in the previous unit where you solved for equations. So what's the opposite operation here? Division. So we're going to divide by 15 here. Whatever you do to one side of the equation sign, you must do to the other. And so those cross out. And so m equals 900 divided by 15. If you take out your calculator, if you do that in your head, it comes out to be 60. So now we know that 60% of $15 is $9. All right, so let's go to another example. Keep practicing on this. So in this section, it's what number is 40% of 120. So all key words in that sentence. So we have the percent, so we can write that as 40 over 100. So that's our second ratio we've created. Now we need to determine what the first one is. We need to find what number is 40% of 120. So 120 is going to be our whole down here, and we need to figure out what is our part. So we have our part, we have our whole, and we have our percent. Okay, so we need to give this a variable name. How about we go with b? Again, just like in the previous example, we're just going to determine what b is to make these two ratios proportional. So we need to cross multiply. So we have 120 times 40, and that is equal to 100 times b. Now, 40 times 120, take out your calculators, and it comes out to be 4,800, and that is equal to 100 times b. Remember the opposite operation, which is division in this case. Whatever we do to one side of the equation sign, we must do to the other. So we're going to divide both sides by 100, cross those off, cross these two zeros off, and we are left with b equaling 48. Now what does that mean? We know it means that 40% of 120 is 48. All right, so just to review, a percent proportion is when you have two ratios, the first ratio being some sort of part of a quantity to a whole quantity, and then the second ratio is a percent that's written as a fraction, and remember percents are always out of 100, that's why we have the 100 as the denominator. So when you have this percent proportion and you're given two values, for example in number 1 here, we're given two values. We're given $15 and $9. And so we plug those two in, we plug our 100 in, and we can determine what percent it is that $9 is of 15 by using our percent proportion. Same in example number 2, except we're looking for that part. We're not looking for the percent in this case. So given any two numbers, you are able to complete this percent proportion and determine percents.